Welcome to the sports podcast, All in the Game, hosted by Rob Goretti and Alex Porter. If you have a profound love for all things sports, then this is the court for you. Please enjoy your time here, and thank you for listening.
All right, welcome to All in the Game, episode 5. We got a fun one planned for you today, but before we do that, a couple fun things happening in the sports world. The first one, Jared Dudley writing a book and having quite the quote.
Yeah, I mean, Dudley, we're a Jared Dudley stan podcast. He was great that year on the Nets. He's just a great basketball mind.
Yeah, what he did to Ben Simmons in those playoffs was legendary.
Yeah, he's just funny. He knows the game. He's going to be a great coach or GM, whatever he decides to do once he's done playing. But he had a great quote about the Lakers last year, and everybody should check out his podcast and his book. But he says, we hear some of those guys talking about how they're the team to beat in LA. Speaking of, obviously, Leonard and George. It's fine if Leonard says stuff like that. He's a defending champion. We don't trip if someone like Patrick Beverley is talking trash. That's how he feeds his family. We get it. We respect the hustle. But we think it's disrespectful for Paul George, who hasn't won, to put himself on the level of LeBron James and Anthony Davis. That motivated us. Now, that's just an all-time burn.
It's as big of a burn as it gets, and it seems like the Paul George hate is getting a little out of hand. I was pretty anti-Paul George myself, but I mean, it's becoming a little bit too much, so I might actually be flipping sides.
It is. I mean, I'm all for it, and that's just a clip of his comment. If you read the whole page on that, he elaborates about how he respects George, and George is a really great player. He just thought it was a little kind of stepping above his pay grade type to go up against LeBron and say he's the best in LA. But no, he is terrific, George.
He's outstanding, and he has a very high level of confidence, which is actually really important. And I mean, it's not a problem that he is carrying himself that way, but he does have to kind of back it up in the playoffs. But I mean, he does have to think of himself that way if they're going to get it done.
Yeah, I agree. And Paul George would be one of those guys. He's going to continue to get this hate and continue to get that label as kind of a loser until he does it.
Yeah, and that's the same thing with all these guys. Like the really good players that don't win, they get this hate. I mean, even LeBron got it. He's like, LeBron's such a loser, and now LeBron's the biggest winner ever just because he won. I mean, and he's still young, and it's going to happen at some point, I'm sure, because he is so talented and their team is so talented. But, I mean, everyone needs to kind of relax a little bit. It's getting a little out of hand.
Yeah, and again, though, we just kind of wanted to shout out Dudley. Like, that's a this league moment. Like, they already won the championship. Doesn't really need to be taking a shot at him, but he does, throws it in.
Yeah, don't take that as me not absolutely being obsessed with Dudley.
And the line about Beverly is hysterical. It's like that's how he feeds his family by trash talking.
It's true, though. He's got a wild story, Beverly. He was like homeless and crazy stuff.
Yeah, and he didn't make it in the league right away either. Like
No.
he was bouncing around, playing places.
Yeah, bouncing around, and then I mean, really does feed his family by just being a really annoying trash talking defensive guard.
Yeah, no, he's great, Beverly. So another big, kind of, I guess probably the biggest news going on in sports right now was the Bauer signing. A lot of drama around this. Do you want to fill us in a little bit?
Yeah, so Trevor Bauer getting signed by the Dodgers adds to an already loaded pitching staff. Their top 6 pitchers right now are Walker Buehler, Clayton Kershaw, Trevor Bauer, David Price, Julio Urias, and Dustin May. Half of those guys are Cy Young winners. The other half are young studs with just electric stuff, and they're going to be tough to beat.
Yeah, it's a huge signing. Obviously, he's, reigning Cy Young winner. And there was just a lot of drama about it. I mean, Bauer loves the spotlight, loves to make everything about himself. So obviously the whole Twitter thing that he's been doing this whole offseason.
He's a social media superstar. He just plays into it, and he's hysterical. He's kind of annoying, I guess.
Yeah, he's annoying as hell. I'd have no issue with him posting a 5 ERA this year for the Dodgers. I wouldn't shed any tears if that happened. And I don't think the Mets fans would either. He kind of jerked the Mets around a little bit.
He did, yeah. It seemed like for a while the Mets were going to sign him. I know a few of our Mets fans, our friends that are Mets fans, were all in on Bauer, and now I know they're back all out on Bauer and hope he has a pretty terrible year.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like now, obviously it's a little Monday morning quarterback, but it kind of seems like he was just dangling the Met. He never really wanted to leave California, it seemed like.
I wouldn't really either. I don't blame him.
And he's from there, but
he's got a pretty good situation there. I mean, he's on the best team in the league. So I mean,
yeah.
I mean, he could have not messed around with the Mets fan base and the Mets organization, but
no, it makes their pitching staffs, which was already the best in the league, just
even more so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I mean, looking at those 6 guys, there was a graphic next to the Padres pitching staff who is arguably the second best in the league. And if you take Bauer out of it, they're probably still better than they're definitely still better than the Padres.
And I think now this is looking ahead a little bit, but come playoff time again, where guys that don't normally pitch out of the bullpen, maybe during the regular season, can come in and throw innings out of the bullpen. I mean, those 6 guys that you named, it's going to be difficult to get many hits against them.
It's an embarrassment of riches for sure.
One last thing I want to say about Bauer, though, as it regarding the Mets. Obviously, the Mets with Steve Cohen, everything. They've been all over Twitter. A lot of people with some crazy takes. To make the take that because they didn't sign Bauer, Realmuto, or Springer, that it's a bad offseason for them is so ridiculously off.
Yeah, did people forget they got the best shortstop in the game?
Yeah, and if they end up, by the time this next season gets going or whatever, if they end up extending Lindor and Conforto, and they've already, they brought in McCann to solidify their catching a little bit, and they're not done yet. They could still easily sign like a late, back end of the rotation starter, or maybe, Jackie Bradley Jr. or something.
Yeah, what Cohen did, which is great for the Mets, is he showed a willingness to make moves. He came in and made the Lindor deal pretty immediately, and I mean, they were in the mix to get Springer, they were in the mix to get Bauer, they were in the mix to get Realmuto. And how close they were to getting them, who knows? But the fact that he's just showing that he's willing to make the moves, and that's a really good sign for the Mets.
Yeah, and it's not like they were in desperate need of an ace. You have the best pitcher in baseball. Bauer has some baggage with him. He's not, in my opinion, he's not a top 5 starter in baseball. I know he won the Cy Young last year, but I still don't consider him top 5 starter in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, in the awards last year, a little fluky. Not fluky, not to take anything away from it, but I mean, 2 months as opposed to 6 to 7 months. I mean, everybody, I'm sure you can take any pitcher and just say, okay, these 2 months, these 60 days, this guy was amazing. So, I mean, he had a really good 2 months, and credit to him for doing it. But I definitely don't think he's a top 5 pitcher.
No, but it's still, even with that said, it's still a massive move. Obviously, the Dodgers just continue to spend money, continue to reinforce their status as the best team in baseball.
Yeah, and part of the reason why that is such a good move is because they don't need him to be a top 5 pitcher. They need him to be a top 10, 15,
They need him
20.
to do what he can do, which is when he's on, dominate.
Yeah.
He can have bad starts here and there. It's, they're going to be looking for him. If he has 1 or 2 dominant postseason starts, for them, it's worth it.
Yeah, no doubt. So to get into what we're going to be doing today, we always talk about there's certain players who have never won a championship and it's always held against them. But what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a few teams over the years. We're going to mention 5, and then we're going to dive deep into 3 more. Just teams that were really close, or we thought maybe could have won a championship if a bounce goes their way. And we're going to get into it. So what's the first one you want to mention?
Well, one thing I just want to say before we get going with this, how the parameters we used. We're not going to, we're both, we're getting up there a little bit in age, getting close to 30, but we're still.
We were born in 1992.
Yeah, so we're not going to be getting into Patrick Ewing, Charles Barkley, those types of teams back in the day. And then also, I just want to say, this isn't we're saying these were teams that year or that stretch of years could have. We're not saying that a team from 2000 maybe that we list would beat like the Warriors or something. We're not saying these are all-time teams. We're saying that they had that opportunity to win it all, and it kind of slipped through their fingers.
Yeah, in their era, they were there. They were a bounce or 2 away. They were a game or 2 away, and they had a shot, but they didn't get it done. This isn't like a comparing eras type of thing.
Yeah. So let's jump in. These teams we thought were worth mentioning. We're not going to dive into them because they're maybe a little step below, but we do think they're worth mentioning because they're very close. The first one I want to talk about is the Dwight Howard Magic teams with my boy Hedo Turkoglu. Then also St. Joe's alum Jameer Nelson.
Yeah, and then they had Rashard Lewis.
Rashard Lewis, they had a really great team. Stan Van, one of the funniest coaches ever.
The funniest looking coaches as well.
Yeah, guy's a legend though. People forget how dominant Dwight was.
Yeah, Dwight. I mean, MVP, first team All NBA, MVP talks, Defensive Player of the Year, just as dominant as they come for that stretch. His body kind of broke down a little bit, but those years with the Magic, I mean, it was just, and they were a little ahead of their time. I feel like they were just like have a really good big guy, surround him with shooting, and
yeah, they were definitely playing the stretch four, and they played a little bit of like positionless with Turkoglu and Rashard Lewis. Both those guys could handle the ball. They could both. Shoot the three well. So that was they were a fun team to watch. They had some good series with those Cavs, those young LeBron Cavs teams.
Yeah, they were really, really good. And just back to Dwight, like he had 3 years, 4 years, 5 year stretch I'm looking at now where he averaged 14, 14, 13, 14, and 14 rebounds. So 5 year stretch where his lowest rebound total was 14. He was a really good shot blocker. Obviously, he could never shoot free throws. Obviously, like a pretty weird guy that.
Yeah, I mean, he's from everything you read, he's a pretty crappy person. He's an anti-vaxxer like our good friend Hartnett. But he's just people forget how dominant Dwight was. Like, he's a Hall of Famer, no doubt.
And that team was really good. So they made the finals in 2009.
Yeah, and they had they were just a really solid team.
Yeah, so they made the finals 2009, lost in a series. They lost in 5, I believe, but the series was actually a lot closer than I think they had a chance to go up 2-1 or something. They had a chance to go up 2-1, I'm pretty sure, and they that series was a lot closer than it looked just like looking back. And then next year didn't get back. I know they had some injury problems and there's just like a lot of drama around the team, mainly because of Dwight, honestly.
Yeah. So the next one, Reggie Miller Pacer teams. We were a little young for this, but towards the end we got to see it, and obviously we know Reggie. He's big on TV now, and one of the better 3-point shooters ever. They had some really good teams there. Made it to the finals. Had some notable names there. Jalen Rose, Jeff Foster, Jermaine O'Neal. They had some good teams. Reggie, obviously a Hall of Famer, but was never able to get to that level.
Right, and then the Trailblazers, or the Jailblazers, if you will, in that same little later than the Miller Pacers, but both those teams actually ran into the same problem. They ran into the Shaq and Kobe problem.
Yeah, and those Jailblazer teams were fun to watch back in the day. Damon Stoudemire. They had Sabonis' father, who was an old man at the time, but he's a legend. He was similar to Sabonis with his basketball IQ. Obviously, Rasheed Wallace was their best player. Bonzi Wells. They had some really nice teams there in Portland.
Yeah, and then I think later on they even added Scottie Pippen.
Yeah, they got Pippen.
An older Scottie Pippen.
I think maybe even Horace Grant. I think they got a couple of
they had
Bulls.
a couple of those old Bulls guys, but that was past their time. But I mean, Pippen was still kind of hanging on by a thread. They came pretty close, and I mean, when I think of that Trailblazers team, I actually always think of that commercial, that Kobe commercial, where it's him dribbling and there's nobody there, there's nobody in the stands, and then the defense and the crowd appears. It's one of the cooler commercials.
It's the pass to Shaq, where then Shaq holds his, obviously it's bad radio, holds his hand down running down the court because of the big one-handed lob.
Yeah, one of my favorite one of the cooler moments, because I remember Shaq always tells a story about what Phil Jackson. So they were down big at halftime in that game, and I still remember Shaq always says the only thing Phil Jackson said during that halftime show was, "All right, guys, I guess we're just not ready for this." And then he walked out, and they came out and
growing up, I was never a fan of the Shaq and Kobe Lakers. I was always rooting for them to lose. So I remember pretty vividly being a big Trailblazers had the cool jerseys, cool court.
Cool team, too.
Rasheed Wallace was awesome to root for. He was a great guy. I always loved Damon Stoudemire. They were a fun team to root for. They just couldn't get over that hump.
Yeah, speaking of another team that ran into the Shaq and Kobe Lakers, as biased Nets fans, we're going to throw in the Jason Kidd Nets. They made it to the finals twice in the mid-2000s, lost to the Spurs, lost to the Lakers. We just both adore Jason Kidd, and that team was just so much
I think
fun.
we can both say he's our second favorite player ever besides LeBron.
Yeah.
Those Nets teams, maybe they don't deserve to be on this list, but they were great. Like, let's not deny what Kidd was able to do those years.
Yeah, when we were making the list, we said maybe they don't, but they also made it to 2 finals. Like some of these, like Miller made it to 1 finals, Dwight made it to 1. The Trailblazers didn't make it to the finals.
And they had a stretch. It wasn't just the 2 years. They had a 5-year stretch. They were a really good team. Kidd was what made us fall in love with basketball.
Yeah,
he was the most entertaining player at the time. I don't care what people tell me. He was just great. And those Nets teams, they're the most fun times that I've had watching the Nets.
Yeah, he was getting triple doubles before getting triple doubles was like a cool thing to do. And then just like you said, like that's the team that made me really fall in love with the Nets. I remember Matt and my uncle having season tickets, always going to watch them play. It was always just.
I remember. I went to a couple of those legendary playoff games throughout their runs there for those couple years, like their big series with the Reggie Miller Pacers, who we mentioned earlier. That's the reason why now the NBA has the red go around the backboard to decide when the timer is, because Miller hit that half-court shot that should have been late. The one I vividly remember, you'd always have to park in that parking lot and then walk the tunnel above the highway.
Oh my God!
Walking back to the car after a couple big playoff wins there, and
that tunnel would get rowdy.
Oh yeah. People don't give Net fans enough credit back in the day.
Yeah, the old Continental Airlines, and then that turned into the Izod Center. But in the Meadowlands, that those arenas got rocking.
They did those, and I'll never ever forget. One of the best pictures in the history of the Nets was Kenyon Martin when they just clinched the Eastern Conference Finals. Kenyon Martin on the scores table, just ripping the jersey, pounding his chest.
Yeah, we can go on and on about this team, so I think it's probably the right thing for the show to move on at this point. But we love that team. After talking about it, they 100% deserve to be on this list. And
we'll take your biases.
Yeah.
And,
but the last one before we get into the 3 we're really going to dive deep into is the James Harden Rockets. So a couple things about them is they had a good run. They just happened to be making their good run at probably the worst possible time.
Yeah, they were a really, really good team. It's just, what we're going to talk about with these teams is, and it's something that when you look back at the history of all sports, there's certain plays here and there that matter to end up being, winning championships and being your legacy. It's a fine line. And they had a few chances there, the Rockets. They really did, where they could have overcame their biggest foe, the Warriors, and they just weren't able to do it. But they were close.
They came close. They deserve a lot of credit because I feel like during that time, not a lot of teams were kind of just quote unquote waiting out the Warriors and just kind of waiting for their little dynasty run to be over. Where the Rockets really tried to face them head on and really tried to take it to them, and they came really close twice. They were up 3-2. Chris Paul gets hurt. That's a tough break for them because you could say if he doesn't get hurt, maybe they make it to the finals. I don't know if they win it, but they deserve a lot of credit for everything that they did in the last few years.
Yeah, they were a good team. They tried to do their best to go up with the Warriors. There was the 1 year before though Paul got hurt, or maybe it was 2 years before that, before the Warriors got Durant. Where the Rockets had a good chance to beat them, and also kind of let that one slip through their fingers.
Yeah, this is it's not like this was all bad luck. They certainly had their shortcomings during this run, but the most notable bad luck instance for them is definitely the Paul injury. They definitely had other opportunities that they dropped the ball with. We both probably would agree that Mike D'Antoni coach team probably not built to win a championship.
Yeah, that's a good that's a good precursor for we want to jump in now to one of the 3 teams that we're really going to dive deep with, and that is the team that made Mike D'Antoni famous, which is Nash's Suns teams. They good stretch there, for a bunch of years. Obviously, Nash 2-time MVP, one of the 5 best point guards ever. Talking about guys like Kidd who are so enjoyable to watch. Nash was as fun as it got.
Yeah, for sure. So their real championship window, and I know they made the conference finals and lost to the Lakers in 2009, but their real championship window, in my opinion, was 2004 to 2007. Their record during that time was 177-69, so they had a really good record. They were the best team in the league a couple years. Their best season, the 04-05 season. They were 62-20. Nash's, I believe, second MVP because he won back-to-back MVPs. I think that was the second MVP year. They came really close twice. They had a lot of tough breaks during this run.
Yeah. The one that instantly jumps out to me is, and I'm not going to remember the exact game, but remember when that fight broke out?
Yeah,
and then their guys came off the bench and they had that rule where then they were suspended for a game.
Yeah, so that was in 2006, 2007. So it was a game, I think it was game 5, and the game was like over. There was like a minute left, and Horry like hip checked Nash into the
right
scores
into the
table.
scores table. Yeah.
And I mean, what happened was they have the rule where if you come off the bench while like a physical altercation's happening, it's an automatic suspension. So Amari Stoudemire and Boris Diaw came off the bench to like help Nash up, it seemed like, and they both got suspended for the next game. And then they wound up losing the series.
Yeah, and, I mean, even at that point, if they're coming off the bench to protect their guy who's the clear leader and heart and soul of their team when he's getting a dirty play by old Robert Horry, I mean, I think it's one of those things where some common sense should have came into it and not have just gone by the letter of the law.
Yeah.
But they did, and that was a bad break for the Suns.
It was a really bad break. And, like, losing Diaw is brutal for them, but Amari was just their second best player, and like, he was healthy at the time, playing well, and it's like losing him, like losing one of your star players, someone that was an All-NBA guy at the time, because of something like this in a playoff series is pretty terrible.
Yeah, that was a big mistake by the league, and so let's just want to go over some of the guys that they had. For some people may not. Obviously, everybody knows Nash and Amari Stoudemire, but also during this stretch, they had Joe Johnson when he was younger, before he went to the Hawks and had those massive years. He could always score the ball. Johnson, kind of their big three for the most part was Nash, Stoudemire, and then Shawn Marion, another guy, one of more entertaining guys to watch, the Matrix.
Yeah, absolutely.
They had Quentin Richardson. He could shoot the lights out. And they had Diaw and Raja Bell, who are both really good role players for them.
Yeah, so they signed Quentin Richardson to a $42 million deal in 2004, and they traded the 7th pick of the draft that year. And if they did not trade that pick, I mean, who knows if they would have taken these guys, but Luol Deng and Andre Iguodala were both available at the 7th pick, so they missed out on an opportunity to draft them, to sign Quentin Richardson, who didn't really play very well for them, and they actually wound up salary dumping him like a year or two later. So the one thing you'll notice with this Suns team is, as good as they were, they made a lot of mistakes in the front office.
Yeah, I mean, they were able to, for a long stretch, keep Nash, Stoudemire, and Marion, and that was going to make you a contender. And then for them, it came down to, can you kind of get enough of those pieces around them? Which ones are working? Obviously, like you said, they tried Quentin Richardson. They tried Joe Johnson for a little bit. They didn't end up wanting to pay him. Diaw was a good player. Leandro Barbosa was a real nice player for them coming off the bench.
And Bell was a good 3-and-D guy for them in the 06-07 years.
Yeah, for them it just really, there was a couple series where they had their shot and they couldn't get it done, is what it comes down to for me. And I think part of that is the style that they played.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we get into those specific instances, like a couple other things that happened is they had Joe Johnson when he was a baby, when he was, I think, 23, 24. And he was a restricted free agent. They didn't match an offer sheet to it was something where they could have paid him like 5 years, $70 million or whatever the contract was, and they didn't want to do it, and they wound up trading him, and that was the Atlanta trade. So they wound up trading him to Atlanta, and then they lost him, and they didn't really get anything back, and that's what really hurt them. They're losing that because for Joe Johnson at that point of his career to be your 4th best player, you're pretty outstanding.
Again, though, I would say even with that, like talent-wise, yes, that's great, but I don't even know if that would have been a great fit. We all know Johnson, ISO Joe's his nickname. I don't know if he was the perfect fit on that team, but just talent-wise, yeah, it's tough to let somebody that talented go without getting something back, especially when you're in championship mode for a 5-year stretch.
Right. So going back to the beginning of this this run for them, so 2004, 2005, they lost to the Spurs in 5 in the Western Conference Finals. One thing to note during that is they lost Joe Johnson in the second round. He broke his face or something. Broke his orbital bone in the second round. And so they lose to the Spurs in 5. Without Johnson, they just weren't deep or talented enough.
They just weren't big enough.
Yeah.
And then their next 2005, 2006, they lose to the Mavs in 6 in the Western Conference Finals. Obviously, it's another close one, a couple games away.
Yeah, it was a bad luck for them. They didn't have Amari that whole year. He got hurt like 2-3 games in and missed that entire year, including the playoffs. So obviously, without Amari, this team wasn't really going to win the finals.
Yeah, and then 2006, 2007, they again get to the Western Conference Finals, lose to the Spurs in 6.
Yeah, and this was the Horry shove year. So
yeah, who knows what happens there?
Right, that's just some really, really bad luck. And then 2009, 2010, they lose to Kobe's Lakers, who went on to win the championship in 2009, 2010. They lost in 6.
I think the Suns are a good team here to speak first about, because the Suns, for a 6-year stretch, you can make an argument every single year they were a top 2 or 3 team.
Yeah, so they were a serious contender every year.
And it's just to make it to, 4 Western Conference Finals is in a 6-year stretch and not ever get to the finals is tough. But
to not even, honestly, they didn't even see a Game 7.
And that kind of goes back. They had some what I would call key flaws in what takes you from being what they were, which is a great team for a bunch of years, to being a championship team, and that is they needed a little bit more size and toughness. Even if it wasn't size, just toughness.
Yeah.
And then that run and gun, try and outscore people just tends to not work in the finals.
It doesn't, and there's a lot of parallels with this team and the Harden Rockets team, and just, both teams had some really bad luck, but both teams just broke down, and at the end of the day didn't have enough defense or toughness, and maybe it was size and rebounding, but both teams just came up short every year, and they never even made it to the finals. So this is one of those disappointing ones.
It's kind of the story of D'Antoni's career.
It really is, yeah. So that brings up questions if is it the style, or I always heard Daryl Morey say you can say this style doesn't work, but there's a lot of other things that other teams are doing that's working even worse than what we're doing. So we're getting closer, we're just not getting it done. So I don't know if it is the style or if it just really is bad luck. to win a championship, you need a lot of things to fall your way.
No, you do, but this is a team that has a Hall of Famer, and with Nash, Marion and Stoudemire were borderline, you could even argue. They both had great careers. Stoudemire's cut short because of injuries, but he was dominant. They had the pieces there. They're great for a long run. It wasn't just 1 or 2 years, but they just never were able to make it to that finals.
Yeah, it's a shame. This is the definition of a team that this is the definition of what this episode is about. It's a team that was really good that just didn't get it done.
And for anyone that grew up around the same age as us, they were such a fun team. Everybody had those Suns jerseys, whether it was Nash or Marion or Stoudemire. The purple, the orange ones,
the gray one. I love
the gray ones. They were so fast paced. Nash was just a magician with the ball. And Stoudemire and the Matrix at that time were as high flyers as it got. They were a great team to watch.
Yeah, crazy athletic. Amari and Nash, pick and roll was just a thing of beauty. Always hit him on the spot, and then Amari just a really good dunker, a really good finisher.
Yeah, really good mid-range. That pick and pop, too. It was a great team to watch.
Yeah, definitely. So moving on to the next team, we're going to talk about the Chris Webber Kings in the early 2000s. Their championship window was 2000 to 2002. During that time, they were 116-48, so really good record. Their best season, probably their best shot, was 2001, 2002. They were 61-21 for the 1 seed. Why don't you talk about some of the key players on this team?
So this is one of the more balanced teams I ever remember.
This is another really fun team.
Really fun, incredible passing team. So obviously Webber was their best player, but then they had Divac, who he was older at that point, but Divac was a terrific passer, good big guy. You had Peja Stojakovic, who's a big-time scorer. Doug Christie, great defender. Mike Bibby, that move was big for them, trading Jay Will to get Mike Bibby. And then they had a good bench too. Hedo Turkoglu, Brad Miller, Bobby Jackson. They had a nice bench there. They just had a really, really balanced team. It was kind of like an old school team where it was nowadays it's a little less positionless basketball. This was your classic Webber's your power. power forward. Vlade's a center. Christie's a
Yeah.
shooting guard. Page is a small forward. They're really built well. They were really tough team because a lot of different guys could beat you. They played good D. They moved the ball terrifically. Very fun team to watch passing wise.
Yeah, seeing like highlights of them it's so fun because the passing is just like they were such a selfless team too. It's like it's really seemed, and I think Chris Webber was a big part of this, and we're kind of probably definitely talk about him a little bit more right now, but he was so selfless as a star. Like he was a really good passer. He didn't really seem to care if like he was the guy.
Well, and something that they did really well was between Weber and Divock, they had two incredible passers for big guys. So they'd run a lot of high-low,
Yeah.
and that's something that's kind of gone from today's game. But the high-low is great because it just opens up everything. It's a nice angle to pass into the post. Somebody like Weber, he could shoot that mid-range. You can do a nice little skip pass cross court to Turkoglu or Stojakovic for three. It really opens a lot of things up, and they were some of the best at doing it.
Yeah, having Weber at that elbow was always like it was just dangerous. There were so many different things he could do there. This team cut really well. They spaced the floor pretty well, and they were really good. So their best playoff run, probably their best shot, was they lost to the Lakers in 2001, 2002. They lost in 7. We're going to talk a lot about that series because a lot of crazy things happened.
Yeah. That's one of those I know I've said a few times, like for us, like growing up, this was like the first era where we were like super into it.
Yeah.
That's one of those that you just can't forget.
Right. So, I mean, in that year, so in 2001, 2002, the Kings were up 2-1, and they were up by, I believe, 1 point, maybe 2 points. And then I remember Kobe drove, took a layup, missed it. Shaq put back, missed the putback, and then I believe it was Vlade tapped the ball out, and there was just like a couple seconds left, taps the ball out, and it's just like shooting practice 3 for Horry, and he hits it, and they tie the series.
Yeah, and it was one of those where obviously it all worked out. The ball bounces back to Horry, and he hits the game-winning 3, but in theory, if you're looking at it, what a horrible play by Horry to not be crashing the glass there as a second biggest guy on their team when you're only down 2 and there's just a few seconds left. Should probably be going in there for the rebound that was up for grabs.
You would think, yeah.
But instead it's Horry, which is what Horry made a lifetime off of, which was being in the right spot and hitting clutch shots.
Big shot Bob, they call him. So, I mean, and this is just the definition of like a great bounce for the Lakers and a terrible bounce for the Kings. So, I mean, that doesn't happen. The Kings go up 3-1, and we're talking about Shaq and Kobe possibly breaking up. But after that game, so now the series is 2-2. The Kings won the next game, so they went up 3-2. And then Game 6, there's a lot of talk about how this game was rigged or fixed and how the NBA might have gotten involved a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe in all that. Like, I know you're going to say some crazy free throw numbers that the Lakers had, but also the Lakers had the free throw advantage in every game because they had Shaq.
Yeah, it wasn't as drastic in this game. And, I mean, I'm back and forth. Do I really think that they said make sure the Lakers win? No, but it seemed like that they said to referee the way Shaq was being defended a little differently in this game.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing, though, that I remember from Game 6 and 7 for the Kings here was them missing free throws.
Yeah.
They had an outstanding free throw shooting team, and Stojakovic, who at the time was one of the best shooters all around in the game, I remember missed some really big free throws, and so did Bibby.
Yeah, and Weber was like a notorious like not make big free throws guy, which was a big issue for them. But just to look at a few of those free throw numbers. So the Lakers took 40 free throws in this game. They took 27 in the fourth quarter, which is an outrageous amount. Throughout the series, the first 5 games, they averaged 25 free throws a game. It's obviously a huge jump, but I mean, it's up for discussion if it was a point of the league. One thing to think about is that I feel like the league was in like a weird place post Jordan, and they were kind of looking for some excitement. I think the ratings were down, and they were looking for like that next team or player to kind of carry the ratings and get the world excited about the NBA again. And the argument is that they wanted the Lakers to be that, so they wanted to make, and they were saying that if the Kings won this series, there's a chance the Lakers get broken up.
Yeah, I mean, I'll let the conspiracy theorists talk about that one. I'll more think about how when I think back at it, I still think of it as, like, watching it live, my eyes told me that it was a choke. But obviously, bad luck in Game 2 with the bounce out to Ori. But the Game 6, and they're still up in Game 6. Going into Game 6 and 7, they have a home game. Like, you've got to find a way to win that. And I think something that I think what the Kings are the perfect example for in this discussion that we have in today is that championship windows are much smaller than anyone thinks they are at the time. This Kings team was so good. Stojakovic was awesome. All of a sudden, after this year, Stojakovic gets hurt the next year, doesn't play in the playoffs, never really the same. Weber and Vlade get a little bit older. This Kings team is gone in 2 years.
Yeah.
And
because Weber, I remember that, I think 2 years after this, I think is when Weber hurt his knee.
Yeah, like their window was, they were for 2 or 3 years a really good team, and this year, they in 2001, 2002, they were the best team.
They were.
Like, they were better. I had watched them during the year. Obviously, they were already a rivalry with with the Lakers, and it wasn't just the Lakers. We talked about the Trailblazers were in this at the time, the Spurs, Mavericks, Suns, a lot of good teams in the West. But they were the best team in the NBA that year. You've got to make your foul shots, and you've got to win on home court, and you can't lose back to back. That was your chance.
Right.
They win that, they're going to win the finals. And all of a sudden, we're thinking about Chris Webber a lot differently.
We are. And, I mean, just to think about this, so they lost the Game 6 in L.A. They lost Game 7 in overtime at home. And this was, I just feel like, an all-time choke job, this Game 7. They had so many opportunities to take it. They just missed a bunch of free throws and didn't make enough plays to win, but this was their chance. They lost at Game 7 at home. You got to get the job done at home if you're the best team in the NBA.
And, like, obviously, it's a while ago, but I have the memory of an elephant. I remember Peja missing foul shots, like just ones you've got to make. And same with Bibby. And they were both saying they're both such good. And like they were such. I know we've said it before. Talent wins. And obviously the other team had Shaq and Kobe, who I'm not denying they're two of the best players ever. But this Kings team was so well balanced, such a good team.
Yeah, just to like. Off that point, so Weber during the season only played 51 games, and they still won 61 as a team, and had the best record in the NBA.
Yeah,
so that just shows what a good complete team they were.
No, they were, and they had got a lot of guys who were battle tested. Like this wasn't a young team. This wasn't a team that should have, you would have expected to come up small in the biggest moments.
Yeah, this wasn't a team like, oh, they're just not ready yet. This was their time.
This was their year, and this will always stand with me. As far as, because with the NBA, it's a little tricky. I think this is partially why we don't have as many teams on this list, is because, basically the history has shown us if you don't have LeBron, Durant, Jordan, Shaq, or Duncan,
or Kawhi,
you're not really going to win the finals. So it's something that is in every sport. The championship window is so small, and it's so hard to actually be that one team that wins it. But with basketball, it's even harder because of the dominance that a certain player or two can have. And this Kings team just really let this one slip by.
Yeah, so before we talk about why we think they didn't get it done, a couple of just interesting stats about them. Peja, who was just known as like a great three-point shooter, only averaged 4 3-point attempts per game, which would be like what your average three-point shooting center would take these days.
Well, it was different, though.
It was, but that just shows the difference in time.
Yeah, because he was also he was just a great all-around shooter. He could get drive to the basket. He was 6'9".
He could. Another interesting thing is just showing how the scoring has changed and the pace is different. And so 104 points per game, that was second in the league during that season. If that was this year, they would be tied with like the Knicks for 29th in the league. So it just shows the difference in times too. Not related at all to them not winning, just interesting.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how much the game. This was kind of we're getting there to that point, and it's starting to open up more, more Nash style.
Yeah, this was like a couple years before Nash and then broke out.
Yeah, but no, this Kings team, I always liked them a ton. I said before, I never rooted for Shaq and Kobe, so if you see something repeating during this list, it's me rooting for Western Conference teams to beat them and failing. But I really, and they were another one that we've also just so fun to watch, those Kings teams.
Before we move on, though, like I know, and I love them too. They really were. Just the way they passed the ball was just so fun to watch. They played really good basketball. But what do you think was the reason they didn't get it done?
I mean, with them, I don't look like with the Suns we had mentioned, like the bad luck of them suspending Stoudemire and them just maybe not having enough like size or toughness to
And
get
they
it
had
done.
injuries, those Suns team. Yeah.
I think the Kings, it really just comes down to choking.
I was gonna
I'll
say the
never
same
get
thing.
over that Game 7 at home, missing foul shots. Obviously, terrible luck, the Ori in Game 2. If they go up 2-0, you probably end up winning that.
Yeah, 3-1.
But
Yeah.
it doesn't, or 3-1, sorry. But either way, you've got to find a way to win Game 7 at home. I just think they were the best team in basketball.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was going to say the exact same thing. I just think they dropped the ball. I think they choked, and I think a big reason for that is Chris Webber. I don't know what it was about him, and maybe he was just built like this, but I really think that timeout in college ruined his like mental.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's tough.
I don't think he was the same after that.
No,
I really
he
don't.
might not have been. I mean, it's a tough thing to. I just think. I think. I mean, we could eventually for a future episode, get you guys the stats, or you guys can look it up at home, but or a little like replay the game. But I just have in my mind that the bigger choke arctic was Peja, because also at that point Peja had kind of been, Webber was getting a little bit up there, and Peja was kind of like that was kind of the reason in their team's jump from a good team to arguably the best team in the league was the jump that Peja made.
Yeah. So my thing with that though is and Webber was really good in Game 6. So I'm not saying he like choked in that game, but and yes, Peja missed a ton of free throws and a ton of shots, and he didn't really play well, but. When your best player is Chris Webber, you kind of need him to carry you home in those situations, and I just don't think he was able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think though part of why we like them so much is that they weren't built around, just him carrying them. I think it was, the fact that they were so balanced.
Yeah, no, and it was, and we're looking at the Game 7 stats now. Christie was atrocious. He was 2 for 11. He had 4 points. Where is Peja? Peja had 8 points. He was 3 for 12.
8 points or 3 for 12. Peja. At that point, he had been having a huge year.
0 for 6 from 3.
Also, wow! I'm just seeing now. I forgot Gerald Wallace on that team.
Oh yeah, big Nets, big trade for the Nets, baby.
Yeah. No, it was a series they should have won, and I think they would have won the NBA Finals that year. It was a great team to watch, and. I was always rooting for him. Yeah,
I mean, part of the way that they were built, I mean, I still feel like there comes a time where you need your best player to kind of take over the game a little bit. And I think either the way they were built or the way that Webber was built, I just don't think he was ready to do that.
All right, so what's this last team you want to talk about here, Bob?
A little more recent. The window was obviously much shorter, but the Thunder with Durant, Westbrook, and Harden. So in 2011, 2012, this was the only year that they really had a shot. They played a few years together, but this was the year that they made the finals and really had a chance to win. They were 47-19, so that was the shortened season. They had Durant, Westbrook, Harden, and Ibaka that were all under or 23 and under at the time, I believe. I don't think any of them were 24. I think most of them were. I think Westbrook and Durant were 23. Harden and Ibaka were 22, if I'm not mistaken. They just had 3 young electric stars that played some insane basketball in the playoffs. They had a great year. They lost to the Heat in 5 that year. The series was a little bit closer than the 4-1 shows, but they didn't really have much of a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I think this team, different from the Nash Suns and the Kings teams, this team, I don't really think it was anything they did wrong. It's just a fun team to talk about because if you look back on it now, obviously just an insane amount of young talent.
Yeah, this is a what could have been.
This is a what could have been because they weren't supposed to beat the Heat. They really were a little outmatched. They're just a little too young for them at that point.
They weren't. Honestly, they probably weren't supposed to beat the Spurs. They were down 3-2 to the Spurs in the conference finals. And at that point, what was the streak the Spurs won? It was like 20-something games they won in a row, dating back to the regular season through the playoffs. They swept through the first 2 rounds. They were on like a ridiculous 20-game win streak. They win the first 2 games. Or no, they win the first 2 games, and then the Thunder pull off 4 in a row. And I just remember I still remember the Game 6. We were in Gilstrap's basement. The Harden step back 3, and I was just like, oh my God, this team is they're going to be unbelievable for the next 10 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously everybody knows they weren't able to keep these guys together. And then even once they got rid of Harden, they still had some excuse me, some really good runs there. But I mean, this team, they were just too young. It was just such a fun team, obviously, and they had a great year, but they weren't able to keep it together, and that's what stinks.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about the trade in a second, but let's look at their little run here. So we just talked about they went down 0-2 and then won 4 straight. They won game 1 of the finals and had a chance to win game 2 of the finals, and then everyone's always going to look back to, was Durant fouled on that like baseline jumper? I don't think so.
Yeah, and it kind of one thing with a team like that is young is they weren't really able to stop the momentum of the Heat after the Heat won that game 2.
Right.
It kind of just snowballed on them.
It did, yeah. And I mean, that was when everybody was in full like LeBron hate mode. But like while it's a little off topic, but while the Spurs series was going on, that was when LeBron had that ridiculous game 6 in Boston, when honestly his career was on the line because they lost the year before to Dirk and them, and then this year, like if they didn't make it to the finals, like who knows what would have even happened to them.
I mean, if he didn't even make it to game 7 in the Eastern Conference Finals. But also this series ended up giving us one of the better funniest images of LeBron ever was at the end of the game when they had it won. He's dancing and jumping on the sideline.
15 minutes straight.
Yeah, that face. I remember I was at Hartnett's house for that one watching it.
Just dancing for 15 minutes straight. But yeah, so this team, this was like more of a what could have been situation. They were so young. So I have it in front of me now. Durant and Westbrook were 23. Harden and Ibaka were 22. Even like Perkins, who's atrocious, but like he was young. Cephalosha, and they had the veteran Fisher on there who had a couple good games.
Shout out Nick Pace with the one of his great takes of all time, saying that Kendrick Perkins would be a Hall of Famer.
Yikes. But so the Harden trade was traded after this season. The interesting thing is they could have paid him, I think whatever max he was eligible for at that point, I'm pretty sure was like 4 years for $60 million, which when you look at now, it's like they can get so much more. But it's crazy to think that this was just a financial decision because they traded him for Kevin Martin, and it seems like they just thought like, okay, Martin averaged 17, Harden averaged 16. We'll just replace the scoring, and we still have Westbrook and Durant. But I think what they missed was what a great playmaker Harden was.
Well, I think what the decision they kind of made was less about, like, say, getting Martin for Harden and even less financial. It was just that they knew you weren't going to be able to keep all 4 of them. And I think they chose Ibaka to go with to go with Durant and Westbrook, thinking that you'd rather have the big. He's a little bit more defensive. I think that was the decision they made because I don't think there would have been any way to eventually. You could have probably for another year or two, but I don't think long term they were ever going to be able to keep those 4 for an extended period of time.
So that was what it was at the moment, but then I think 2 years later or possibly 3, the cap spiked and they would have actually been able to. But they didn't have to make this decision this year. That's the thing that was kind of like frustrating about this whole thing. Like they could have waited another year and ran it back with this team.
Yeah. I mean, I think also part of it was that, they were really at that point, Westbrook and Durant were kind of thought of as a step above Harden. And I think they were going for more of like, pieces that fit perfectly around them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, this is going to always be one of the biggest what ifs. Like, what if they ran it back, or what if they found a way to keep these guys? But another thing to note is that Harden was really bad he was really good in the Western Conference Finals. He was really bad in the NBA Finals.
Yeah, he struggled a little bit. The defense picked up a little. Those Heat teams, they could be really good defensively when they turned it on.
Yeah, and they were on a mission that year. It seems like after they won that Celtics Game 6, there was no shot that they weren't going to win the finals.
Yeah, but no, I mean, it was a great, like we said, what could have been. We're kind of seeing a little bit of it, obviously not with Westbrook or Ibaka,
right.
But now with the Nets, it's not a lot of defense. There's a spoiler.
Oh, sorry, you little sip of water threw me off.
Yeah, sorry.
No, there's not a lot of defense, but this was a really fun team, and I wish they could have made another run at it.
I have a team for you guys.
Okay.
2006-2007, Denver Nuggets, Allen Iverson, and Carmelo Anthony.
Well, first of all, how many years was Iverson with the Nuggets?
A couple, but I have it's funny that you bring that team up because I have we were talking about going to Nets games earlier. I went to the Nets game and my dad was able to get great seats, like a couple
behind the bench,
rows
right?
back from the bench against that Nuggets team. Those Nuggets teams had some of the more. There wasn't a guy in their starting five that had 3 inches of his body not covered in tattoos.
With Kenyon Martin, Iverson, and Carmelo, and
J.R. Smith,
Canby, all those guys.
Yeah, like just a who's who
of arm sleeve tattoos.
Yeah, but then they were really good. I mean,
they were.
But I think their issue was they were built to be a good regular season team and never really built for a long playoff run.
Yeah, I think they had like one shot where they made the Western Conference Finals, and then they were never. I going into the year, they were never a team I was like they have a legitimate chance.
No, I mean they had a lot of talent, just never. They were always kind of a little bit step below, but they're definitely a very entertaining.
I was gonna say fun team to watch with all like the athletes and all the scoring, but never quite on that level.
Yeah, and I don't think they had the ability. Those weren't necessarily all the guys that have championship mentalities.
No.
I should say.
No, and I remember just loving Carmelo so much in college, and
I remember that too.
And being absolutely heartbroken when he went to the Knicks because we had a shot of getting him.
Well, they would have gotten him if he turned us down.
Yeah,
told us no.
So we got stuck with Duran.
Yeah.
But I just remember being so devastated when Carmelo got traded to the Knicks.
Yeah, I was. I'm a Carmelo stan. He gets so much hate, and I think people forget about how just absolutely ridiculous he was for years and years. He was great. Obviously, he kind of stabbed us in the back saying he didn't want to come to the Nets. But he was great for the Knicks for those couple of years. He wanted to be there. Yeah. He had some big shots for them. He had some good years.
They had a couple of years where they never made it to the conference finals because they're losers, but
yeah, obviously Melo's flawed. He always was. He's not that upper echelon, but he's a Hall of Famer, one of the best individual scorers ever.
He's like a 1A to that top tier.
He just wasn't that. It's kind of similar to what we talked about D'Antoni's style of play earlier. Melo just wasn't a championship style play. Yeah, but he was going to give you everything he had offensively.
Yeah. So this was a great conversation about these teams. Anybody else or anything else you want to add to this?
No, I mean I think really what it shows more than anything is just how hard it is to win an NBA Finals, right? Because of the impact one or two guys have. So there's only one team that can do it. I mean, I know it's a cliche, but it really is the truth. And these are some of the teams that we thought were really, really great, really fun to watch, and a couple of them play here or there away from getting it done.
Yeah, bounce here or there, who knows? But it really does show how hard it is, and it shows how much credit the teams that do win deserve, because you need so much to go right, and you need so much to go right within your team to get this done. So another fun week, episode.
We want to just say thank you to everybody who's listened to us and liking, sharing with every person you've ever met.
That is the strategy.
We're on all the platforms now, so there's no excuse, people out there.
Yeah, so Apple and Spotify, honestly, I know you didn't even know anything besides Spotify existed, but I didn't know anything besides Apple and Spotify existed. But we're on every platform you could possibly imagine.
Shout out to Indonesia.
Yeah, and we have one listener in Indonesia, so that's great.
We're really enjoying this. We're going to keep doing it. We've got some really fun topics coming ahead. We're going to have some of our friends on again, have a couple mock drafts coming up, but we're probably going to venture a little bit. I know we keep telling you guys it's not just a basketball podcast, and if you look at our episodes, you would think that we're liars, but we are not. We're not just a basketball podcast. We'll be talking a lot of baseball soon. We're just kind of waiting for I
think that's actually a little strategy. We want everybody to keep coming back, seeing when we're going to stop talking about basketball.
And we just need some of the pieces to fall where they will in baseball, and then we'll give some predictions for the year and year preview and everything. But everybody enjoy the game tomorrow. Should be a fun one.
Yes.
Big game.
So one thing also to note is that the episodes are going to be dropping Monday morning. So they'll be live on Monday morning, so you guys can enjoy them, and hopefully we make your ride to work Monday morning a little bit better.
And, it's COVID, so a lot of people probably aren't riding to work. So if you go downstairs, turn your coffee mug on and plug in All in the Game.
Yeah, it sounds like a great way to start the day. So thank you for supporting us, and we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this episode of All in the Game. If there's anything that we can do to make sure that you return for the next show, please let us know so we can improve. Thank you again for listening. See you next time.